Welcome back to Takeout. Raphael Warnock is a Democratic senator from Georgia. He's been that since 2021. Since 2005, he's been the senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, a very famous church in the civil rights movement. Warnock has a new book out discussing, from a sort of scriptural point of view, issues facing the United States. It is called The Crooked Places Made Straight, Reflections on the Moral Meaning of America. I spoke with Senator Warnock about that and much more at the Dubliner. That's a restaurant near Capitol Hill. So let's start with the Iran war. What's been announced? What's your perspective on what you've heard so far from the president?
Well, I hope that at last this war, a little over 100 days over, is over. I hope the war is over. But the question is, why were we in the war in the first place? We've spent nearly $1 billion a day. The Strait of Hormuz, they're saying, will be reopened. Well, it was open before we started the war. And we are a long way from what Donald Trump promised and what it looks like he's going to deliver. It looks a lot like where we were before any of this started.
Does the Senate need to approve whatever has been agreed to, this memorandum of understanding, the framework, whatever it's being called?
If it is to be sustainable, and that's the whole point of an agreement, it needs to come through the Congress. The decision to take us to war in the first place should have come through the Congress. And so I think it's past time for Congress to assert itself. I am heartened that I've heard a few Republicans say that it ought to come through the Congress, because we don't, these things need to be sustainable over time, so that all the parties that are a part of the agreement can take some comfort in that. But it's also the reason why I am introducing my own War Powers Resolution today, because the declaration of war in the first place is clearly within the purview of the Congress. This president has run roughshod over that. He's taken us into an illegal war. It spiked gas prices. And if you look geopolitically, China has done it pretty good as a result of this war. Russia, because of the spike in gas prices, is doing better, even as they wage war against Ukraine. This has not been good for America or its credibility in the world.
Are we safer?
I don't think so.
Why not?
No. Well, you have the issue with the enriched uranium. That has not been addressed. We don't know how it's going to be addressed, if it's going to be addressed. Listen, President Trump walked into office, and we had an agreement already with the Obama agreement.
Which he canceled and got out of.
Which he canceled. He never explained why he wanted to get out of it. And
said it was a bad deal.
It was the worst deal in the world. Well, we'll see where we land on Friday. But by all reporting, the regime is clearly still in place. The stickier issues regarding Iran and its ability to get a nuclear weapon, which it cannot have. There's no evidence that the details around that have been worked out. He's gotten the Strait reopened. Well, the Strait was open before he started the war. And the regime is very much in place, and it seems like the folks who've stepped up are even more hardline than their predecessors.
Let's talk about some Georgia politics. First thing, it's primary day in Georgia, statewide runoffs. And also, as I understand it, Senator, the legislature will meet, I think, tomorrow to begin consideration of redrawing district lines in Georgia for 2028. Give me a read on both.
Well, on the gerrymandering issue, this is a dark moment in our country and in the effort to have a multiracial democracy. The Supreme Court did a lot of damage to our electoral system. They gave a license to southern states to take us back to a time that feels more like 1956 than 2026. And what we're seeing is governors, state legislatures all across the South come back into session in order to draw the lines in such a way as to give craven politicians an outsized voice, allowing them to pick their voters rather than the voters picking the people who will represent them. I mean, think about that. This is election season. Election season is about the voters picking their representatives. And what we're witnessing right now is politicians working overtime as a result of this horrible decision to pick their voters.
So let's talk about the Supreme Court for a second. Is it your point of view, Senator, that the Supreme Court gave up on the idea of a multiracial democracy, or it went back to the Constitution, which did not envision it in the first place?
We are seeing a Supreme Court that is an extreme court. They are behaving as partisan hacks in many respects. And this has been going on for a while.
You know what I'm getting at, though? The Constitution did not envision what came out of the Civil Rights Movement, okay? The Civil Rights Movement had to create a different reality. So is the Supreme Court going back to the original interpretation of the Constitution? Meaning that it did not envision a multiracial democracy.
True. No, that's true. Look, Thomas Jefferson said that, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed with their creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Words that Dr. King called sublime words of cosmic proportions, he says. But he was a slaveholder. And that is the complicated history of the American family story as we approach this 250th anniversary.
Right.
But the beauty and power is that they put those sublime words on paper. And the story of America is to work to get the country to live up to its ideals. So no, black people weren't among, when he said all men, he didn't mean all. And when he said men, he only meant men. So thank God for the civil rights movement. Thank God for the women's suffrage movement. The process of becoming a multiracial democracy where everybody has a voice has been just that, a process, and they're moving us backwards.
The Supreme Court is.
The Supreme Court is moving us backwards. They are enabling Donald Trump and his partners in Congress to diminish the voices of the people who I think are well poised to hold them accountable.
What effect will that have in Georgia? Is that firing your people up?
I think it is, absolutely. I think this is a case.
So when you look at the governor's race and the Senate race, what a practical political effect on the ground do you think that has?
As I move around Georgia, ordinary people are very upset by this. And I think, when you try to diminish people's voices, they don't take kindly to that. And I've seen it up close in my own races. When I ran for re-election in Georgia, they looked at the anatomy of my victory and they came after it with surgical precision. They changed the rules around the runoff, and just as we were going into the runoff, I'd already won in the earlier runoff for my initial election. They said, well, you can't vote the first weekend of the runoff. And they offered some misinterpretation of an old Georgia law. The officials in Georgia said our hands are tied because they understood how the voters in my coalition show up. So they tried to cut them off at the path. They said their hands were tied, and so I decided to untie their hands. I sued them. And then the folks who said their hands were tied then went and appealed the decision rather than focusing on setting up the infrastructure so people could vote. I had to win 2 appeals just so people could vote the first weekend of that election. 70,000 people voted that weekend, including college students who were home for the Thanksgiving weekend. I won by 100,000 votes. They are playing games with people's voices.
And when those, in your words, games get played, it creates a backlash or a fire effect.
Evil always goes too far.
Senator made reference to a war powers resolution that failed on a vote of 47 to 48 in the Senate. There were 5 Senate absences. You can catch my full conversation with Senator Raphael Warnock on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform.